All right. So, welcome to yet another MetaLogix quick take session. My name is Roy Martinez. I am the lead support representative for the Diagnostic Manager tool. I'm also transitioning into the kind of solutions engineer role. So, I'm basically a product expert for DM and backup. Quite a few years of experience working with these tools since their original 1.0 inceptions. And as such, I've had a great opportunity to kind of watch these tools feature sets grow in response to customer demand and all the different underlying technology advancements since that 1.0 version. So in essence, I've seen it all when it comes to Diagnostic Manager, and I'm really eager to share some of that expertise with you guys through the course of these quick take sessions and also through our academy trainings, which you may also be aware of. Today, we're going to talk about an oft requested subject, and that is the monitoring of ULS logs in the MetaLogix Diagnostic Manager tool. Specifically, we're going to be going over the following topics. So we're going to review the requirements necessary for ULS monitoring. Oops, typo there. We're going to be enabling health and usage logging within SharePoint. We're going to be confirming timer service jobs get created as expected. And then we're also going to be installing the component analysis solution from Diagnostic Manager. Now you see an asterisk here. And the reason that's there is because our last session, our last quick take was on that very subject. So I'm going to be really glossing over that installation phase and referring you back to that recorded session if possible. Moving on, we're going to be talking about using the feature within the console. We're going to look at some options we have for configuration, setting the logging level that we want to see, configuring some alternative timer job settings, and a couple of other things. Going back to the console, we're going to be actually performing the sync of the logs and talking a little bit about what that means behind the scenes. And then ways that we can manage that log within the console, different ways we can use the UI to change the view or sort things and so on and so forth. So that said, let me go ahead and get out of the PowerPoint presentation and jump over to my environment. So here we are in Diagnostic Manager. As you can see here, I've got an installation and I'm monitoring a couple of farms. The one in our focus here is the farm called SharePoint 2013A, just a dummy SharePoint 2013 installation consisting of two primary servers, the main web app and application server, SharePoint 2013A, and its SQL server hosting the databases for this farm, content and otherwise. And yeah, so everything's running along on a good clip. As you can see, I've got some warning and critical messages across the different farms. Things seem to be okay in this respect, but I still want to view my ULS logging and kind of see the history of affairs, or maybe a particular error has popped up for a user and he's given me a correlation ID and I'd like to go research that ID in ULS and see what's going on. So let's, before we get too deep into this, let's just review what we have to have in place in order to do all these fun and fancy ULS monitoring tricks. I'm going to pull up a document here, and that's going to be our Diagnostic Manager installation guide. As soon as I find it, here we are. And in this guide, let me just go to the top here. I'm just going to do a quick search, oops, for ULS. I'm going to search through until I find what I'm looking for, and I didn't. Do I have the wrong document? Maybe. Sorry about this. This is what happens when you wait to the last minute to start your presentation. Here we are, wrong document. Now I'm looking in the actual user guide. My apologies for that. So Diagnostic Manager user guide.pdf, which gets packaged with the tool upon installation or download. You can see this document. And on page 26 of that document, we have a section enabling and configuring ULS log entries for SharePoint 2010 or 2013. A quick brief summary, but the real points here are ensuring that the timer job in SharePoint that is used to collect ULS data usage and health is enabled and set up. And we reference a fun TechNet article here that goes through those steps. And I'll go ahead and pull that up as well to give you some visibility. This is all just part and parcel out of the box SharePoint management stuff, right? So let's see here. There we go. All right. So in this article from TechNet, we talk about how to go about configuring usage and health data collection in 2013. And it's pretty simple stuff, guys. I mean, anyone who's been into the monitoring section of central administration will be familiar with this process. You've probably already got it set up if you're managing ULS logs outside the most basic sense. So I won't go too in detail about this, but this particular link is absolutely referenced within the documentation. So just give it a look-see over. It's basically a matter of checking yes to a couple of checkboxes within the monitoring section of the central administration interface. And then once that's done, we have to make sure that the, again, aforementioned component analysis solution is in place. And I can confirm that in my environment by jumping over to Central Admin. On the farm in question and going into the Manage Farm Solutions section and reviewing that the solution is in place. And I'll do that now. Please forgive the speed at which my VMs are operating. But if we're over here in Central Admin and I'm in System Settings and I go to Manage Farm Solutions, I can absolutely identify that right here, this MetaLogix Diagnostic Manager component analysis solution is installed and rolled out to the central administration web application. This is the default behavior when you install this solution via our installer. It's going to install globally. I happened to have pushed mine out via PowerShell to some specific web apps, but I did include Central Admin as one of those. So the reason we need the component analysis solution to be available on the Central Admin web app is that we're going to be performing a very specific step, and that step is to kick off this particular timer job you'll see in here. It is going to be this guy, Diagnostic Data Provider Trace Log. When this particular service runs, what it does is it creates a view in your WSS_logging or equivalent database, depending on what you named it, and syncs the ULS logs to that view of the database. So as you can see here, I've got my logging database expanded. I'm in the views section. If I go down, I'll see a view, and of course we all know a view is literally just an aggregation of data from several different tables. And if I do a query of that particular view, I'm going to see what should be congruent to the current state of affairs in the ULS log, right? We've got all these different records, category, the level of the ULS log entry, the row ID for this table, the correlation ID for the actual event, et cetera, et cetera. So this is basically a one-to-one view of what you'd see if you went and opened your ULS log on whatever WFE, all aggregated from across the entire farm. And this is precisely what we're going to leverage to view that in our tool. Essentially what happens is if we go back over here to the tool and I go to the farm scope, this ULS view will be synced with that trace log view in your SharePoint database and basically give us a breakdown of that view in real time, depending on when we plan to sync it. So let's back up just another step real quick. And let's look at some options for this configuration. So we've made sure that health usage and data is being collected for the farm. We've made sure that the timer job service is there and capable of running and has been scheduled. This is the default schedule, by the way, for SharePoint when you first set this up. In other words, it runs every 15 minutes and syncs to that view. And we do see that things are in that view. So things are working on the SharePoint side, right? This being said, we should have no problems collecting that data within Diagnostic Manager as long as that component analysis solution is in place and we're able to quote unquote sync that information. So let's talk about what sync really means. So if I go over to the ULS section of the collection service options, and again, just to review how I got there, I went to the options section, collection service, and then I right-clicked over to the ULS section. Great. Right off the bat, enable gathering of ULS data for SharePoint databases. So with this unchecked, ULS monitoring is disabled. Of course, it's going to be checked by default, but if you ever need to turn it off for whatever reason, we can certainly do so. By default, we set it to gather these entries every 30 minutes. In other words, sync every 30 minutes. It's important to identify that the service that runs and syncs to the view is a separate concept from the synchronization that happens on the monitoring side to synchronize what's in that view from WSS logging to our table of the same name. As you can see here, we've got a SPULS trace log table within our repository database. Essentially what we're doing when we sync is copying information from the view, writing it to our own repository database, and then making it visible in the console. There is one more table worth looking at, and again, this is all kind of deep dive information. There's no expectation that you'll ever necessarily need to be interfacing with these tables directly, but I'm of the opinion that the more you know, the better off you are, so why not give you the back-end information as well, right? This is a technical meeting, so we'll discuss the technical details. The gathering settings table just gives us an overview of some information that's pertinent to the actual sync operation itself. So all that said, back in the tool then, these options here, first off, I can clear all the ULS data history, and that's going to it's going to clear our table, our trace table, and also clear our gathering settings table, right? So right now, if I go into the ULS trace log, I should see nothing. If I go into gathering settings, I should see defaults. And defaults equal level ID 80, last log time 1970. Notice I have a setting for farm ID 1 and a setting for farm ID 2. Remember, because I'm monitoring two separate farms in this installation. So I've set these guys back to defaults by using that clear ULS history. And as such, I should, if I refresh here, see no entries in ULS. So I want to sync this now to make it so that I can see the latest ULS entries as per the table we identified, the view we identified from the WSS logging table or database. And it's just as simple as clicking this sync ULS. Now remember, based on my configurations, this will occur every 30 minutes just by default. So if I waited 30 minutes, I would definitely see ULS logs enter this table. But I know what I'm doing and I want to see it happen in real time. A couple other things to note here real quick. ULS log retention set to 40 days. That means we're going to remove ULS data from that trace log table after 14 days. This is an archiving and grooming configuration to keep our database in manageable levels, right? Alternatively, I could override the SharePoint settings for my timer job and define them right here in the tool. And if I do that, I'm prompted, hey, let's understand you're overriding SharePoint. Please be aware, right? And it's totally cool. We're power users. We know what we're doing. But in my case, I don't really want to do that. I want to use the SharePoint defaults because I'm fine with syncing the view every 15 minutes. And to note, the only reason you would ever use this is if you're the SharePoint administrator and you plan to manage ULS specifically and solely from the Diagnostic Manager perspective, right? The last thing to show here is this little wheel, which I click over and will give me an indication what trace levels I plan to see in DM. In DM. Doesn't affect at all what gets synced to the view in the WSS logging. What it does affect is which of those records am I going to pull over to my internal trace log database table. I hope that makes some sense, and we'll go through questions in a moment. But right, so I've set this up. I know what I want. I only want to see things up to the unexpected level. I don't care, for instance, about informational messages or verbose logging data. I only care about highs, criticals, errors, warnings, and unexpected. All the reds and yellows. So I've got my configuration set up. I'm good to go with that. I click OK. And now if I go to the overview here and I click Sync ULS, a request for synchronizing and gathering ULS log entries has been sent to the collection service. Might take a couple minutes, but we're going to hit OK. Give the tool some time. And note that I'm looking specifically for the last hour, right? Had I synced with another range selected, I'd get a lot more data, but I only care about the last hour. So after some time passes, and I'm not sure how long it'll take me to sync, almost none it seems. As you can see right off the bat, we now have tons of information regarding our ULS log. And this is basically an easier to view version of the ULS log that you're probably used to seeing, right? So if you have multiple WFEs, we'd see the different computer names listed in this particular column. The correlation IDs in this column. If I knew a specific correlation ID, I could type it in here and search the log for that specific ID. Alternatively, if I wanted to, I could group by correlation ID. And this is actually a really dandy feature. And now I've got all the correlation IDs separated and grouped together. So now I can see the history of a particular correlation ID event, which I think is pretty darn cool. Let me go ahead and ungroup that real quick. And you can group by any of these guys, right? And they concatenate on top of each other. And there's some sorting options and things of that nature. So I don't want to go too crazy with the actual interface, but I hope this at least illustrates kind of the life cycle and the workflow of how we go about collecting ULS data, where it's sourced from, which is at WSS_logging or whatever you've named it, view, right? So that view gives us a breakdown of all the different events in SharePoint. Our sync operation in the collection service reads this view, copies these table records, puts them over into our own table, which as you can see is now populated since I synced, only with the events of the level I've specified in my configuration options. And then as you can see here, if we refresh our gather settings, you'll see that the last log time for this particular farm is actually today. Once we have it in that table, we can now show it in our graphical view and cook it, so to speak, with our different sorting options, search options, filtering options, and the like. So that is the quick, fast, in a hurry crash course on ULS Monitoring and Diagnostic Manager. The sky's the limit in terms of answering how can you get value out of this. Obviously, at the very least, it's a more human readable format of the ULS log. I mean, there are other log readers out there, but we've added some, we can centralize everything to one specific tool. The Diagnostic Manager tool now gives you the complete view of everything that you would likely care about from the SharePoint perspective, including ULS logging entries, including the ability to group by specific column headers in that table, including the ability to see history, and then alternatively to alert on ULS status entries. For instance, if a critical ULS alert comes in, we can generate an alert to let someone know by email or whatever the case may be when those occurrences occur. So that said, I'll go ahead, and if anyone has any specific questions they want to shoot out, please do so now. And yeah, we can go from there. And if there are any questions and this is all making total sense, then I will go ahead and adjourn the meeting for now early, but just fire them out if you got them. So far, it looks like it's making total sense. The key takeaways here, guys, are, what we're doing when we say sync is we're literally copying records from SharePoint's logging database and pasting them to our own, so to speak, with some additional filtering to give you only what you care about seeing. The key end user specific sections you want to look at are obviously the collection service options, ULS, where, remember, we can always clear the ULS history to get us back to square one. And then obviously reviewing your own SharePoint usage and data collection configurations. So I hope this has been informative, at least in some capacity, or helpful, hopefully. And again, if there are any other additional questions or subsequent comments or feedback, feel free to reach us at the normal way. I mean, you can call us at the main number, 202-609-9100. Reach us via the support portal, or go to the MetaLogix website and log a case there, or submit questions by email. And that said, it looks like we're going to be able to finish up early, and I will let you guys have 10 more minutes of your day back. I appreciate your time. Thank you so much for joining us, and I look forward to talking to you again in the next MetaLogix Quick Take session.